She sits on the edge of the bed in the silence of the early morning. The house sleeps, the world sleeps, but she does not, because there is a voice inside her head that won't stop. A voice that comments, that judges, that relives the conversation from hours ago, sentence by sentence, trying to understand where she went wrong. You should have said something different. That was embarrassing. Why do you always do that? The voice doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It is soft, intimate, almost affectionate, and precisely because of that, impossible to ignore. She closes her eyes. She takes a deep breath. She tries to clear her mind, but the voice continues. Clear your mind, as if it were that simple. You've tried that 1,000 times and it never works. And then comes the question she has never asked aloud, but which has lived silently inside her so many times. Who is speaking and who is listening? This scene is not uncommon. Perhaps you have experienced something like this. Perhaps you are experiencing it now. That strange feeling that there is someone inside you observing everything, commenting on everything, judging everything. And the most disturbing thing, you believe that this someone is you. But what if it isn't? What if this voice that narrates your life, criticizes your choices, tries to solve your problems, is just background noise? What if your true self is the one who listens, silent, present, but never says anything? Krishnamurti said, when the observer realizes that it is the observed, understanding is born. It seems simple, almost obvious, but this realization is one of the most profound you can experience. Because it is not a mental trick, it is not a pretty phrase to repeat. It is such a radical change of perspective that it can turn your life upside down. Or perhaps for the first time, set it right. We all carry the weight of exaggerated self-awareness, that feeling of being judged all the time, not by others, by ourselves. You act and soon after the voice appears. That was right, that was wrong. You should have done it differently. It's like a sports commentator describing a game he invented himself. And the most curious thing is that we believe we are that voice. But what if we're not? What if that voice is just an echo, and your true self is the one who listens, who observes but never gives an opinion? What would happen if instead of trying to silence that voice, you started to observe who is listening? This journey is not to a new place. It is to a deep recognition. What you seek is already what you are. The consciousness that tries to understand the world is the same consciousness that creates the world. And when this is realized, something awakens. Something that has always been there, just waiting to be seen. But before you get there, you need to understand the most common mistake. The mistake that keeps most people trapped for years, decades, perhaps their entire lives. And that mistake is not in not knowing who you are. It is in believing that you already know. The most common mistake of those who begin a spiritual journey is to think that the voice that comments on everything is the observer, but it isn't. This confusion is so common that even experienced meditation practitioners spend years stuck in it. It's like trying to silence a crowd shouting for silence. The more you insist, the more noise there is. This voice, this internal commentator, has familiar forms. Sometimes it's the narrator who recounts your day as if it were a movie. You woke up late again. Now you're late. Of course, it was obvious that this would happen. Other times it's the critic who blames and judges every action. You always ruin everything. Why can't you be normal? And there are times when it's the cheerleader who exalts and praises you as if you were the hero of the story. You're amazing. No one does it like you. But deep down, they all do the same thing. They try to define you. And the funny thing is that this narrator seems separate from your daily life, as if he were a serene entity observing life from above. He presents himself as an impartial witness, as if he were just reporting the facts. But it's all an act. It's the ego dressed up as a sage. It pretends it's just witnessing, but in fact it's reacting. It's defending itself. It's trying to maintain control of a narrative that was never real. Think about it for a moment. When you're home alone and you make a small mistake, you knock something over, you forget where you left your keys, who immediately comments, "What an idiot!" Again, there's no one to judge you, but the voice appears anyway. And it's not just describing what happened, it's creating a story about who you are. It's turning an isolated moment into evidence of a pattern. You always do this. You never learn. This voice feeds on repetition. It takes fragments from the past, moments of shame, fear, rejection, and uses them as arguments to define the present. Remember that time you failed? Yeah, you're going to fail again. And the most disturbing thing is that it sounds so familiar, so intimate, that you believe that voice is you. But it's not. It's just an echo. Imagine yourself in a coffee shop. People are talking, cups are clattering, someone is laughing loudly at a nearby table. If you only pay attention to these noises, you forget even the taste of your coffee. You are physically present but mentally absent. That is the inner commentator, a background noise that you have come to confuse with your true essence. These voices seem observant, but they see nothing. They only react. The true observer is not noisy. He does not think, judge, or give opinions. He just exists. He perceives the comings and goings of the mind, but does not get mixed up with it, not out of indifference, but because he has already understood that none of these voices are you. He sees the critic appear and disappear. He sees the narrator construct his stories. He sees the cheerleader try to inflate the ego, and he remains silent, just witnessing. Krishnamurti said Dista, the observer is the observed. When this realization happens, the separation disappears. You understand that the inner commentator is just a product of the mind, and for that very reason, a product of your history. It feeds on traumas, memories, desires, insecurities, culture, childhood, everything that has been accumulated over the years. That is why it is so unstable. One day it calls you a failure, the next a genius, always oscillating, and yet we believe it. But here's the truth that few realize. That voice isn't trying to protect you. It's trying to control you. It needs you to keep believing that it is you, because if you find out that it isn't, it loses all its power. And the ego won't accept that. It will fight. It will create new stories. It will disguise itself as spirituality, self-knowledge, wisdom. Ah, now I understand. I am the observer. And that's it. The ego has just appropriated yet another concept. That's why it's so hard to realize that this voice is not you. It sounds intimate. It knows your most secret pains. It speaks as if it were your best friend. But here's the point. Intimacy is not identity. Just because something sounds familiar doesn't mean it's true. Trauma can be intimate, but it is not you. A belief can be old, but it is not you. And that voice that narrates, criticizes, and tries to control, it is not you either. The revelation begins when you experience for the first time that strange silence between one thought and another. Sometimes it happens in the middle of a breath, when for a second everything stops. In that moment, you are not thinking or commenting on anything. You are just present. That is the observer, the one who witnesses the storm without getting wet, the one who sees fear without running away, the one who sees love without getting attached, the one who feels sadness without wanting to expel it. It is in this space that transformation happens. Because when you understand that the commentator is not you, you simply stop fighting it. You no longer need to convince it of anything. You no longer need to silence it. It can say whatever it wants, because you know it's not you. And the most curious thing is that when you stop fighting, it also falls silent. Not because you won, but because he lost his audience. And in the silence, you finally find yourself. But if that voice isn't you, who is it? The mistake many make is to seek the observer as if it were a refuge, a place separate from life, as if it were possible to find a quiet corner inside the mind and hide there. But the observer is not a place. It is the space where everything happens. Alan Watts said, "You don't have to force yourself to be yourself. You already are." And that feeling is both liberating and disconcerting, because you begin to realize that the most essential part of you has no voice, no opinion, no judgment. It just observes. Think about how you feel when you are completely immersed in something. Maybe watching a movie that captivates you from beginning to end, or reading a book that makes you forget where you are. In those moments, the inner voice disappears, not because you silenced it, but because you stopped feeding it with attention. And what is left? Pure presence. You are still conscious. You are still aware, but there is no narrator. There is no critic. There is only you, present, alive, whole. The true observer does not need to justify, correct, or control anything. They are simply present, like the sky, which receives all the clouds without ever becoming one of them. A storm may pass. The sky remains. A sunny day may come. The sky remains. And this silence is not empty or dead. It is a living silence full of presence. It is there when you feel anger, when you laugh at a joke, when you fall in love, when you feel fear. It is there right now as you hear these words. But notice, it is not the observer who thinks about what is being said. He is the one who sees his thoughts reacting. You may be listening to this and thinking, that makes sense. Or, I'm not sure I agree with that. And both thoughts are just more content, more clouds passing by. The observer neither agrees nor disagrees. He just sees. And here many give up. Because the mind, addicted to control, wants to understand the observer, to give it a name, a theory, something that fits into a Sunday conversation. But the observer escapes words, not because it is complex, but because it is too simple, so obvious and close that the mind gets lost trying to explain it. It's like trying to describe the taste of water. You know exactly what it's like, but when you try to explain it, words fail. That's why spiritual masters often contradict each other when describing it. Some call it God, others call it emptiness. Some say it is the soul, others say it is pure consciousness. Krishnamurti called it a state of attention without choice. The Upanishads called it Atman, the eternal self, the silent witness of all experiences. In Buddhism, they speak of Rigpa, the naked presence beyond time. Marcus Aurelius, among the Stoics, taught to observe thoughts as if they were someone else's, with calm and clarity. Each tradition gives it a different name, but the experience is the same. A consciousness that sees everything without being confused by anything. A presence that perceives without getting lost in what it perceives. And the beauty of it is that you don't have to believe in any tradition to recognize this in yourself. You don't have to be Buddhist, Christian, Hindu, or Stoic. You just need to stop and observe. When you perceive the silence of the observer, you discover that silence is not the absence of life. It is the very essence of it. Noises, thoughts, emotions, all of these come and go. But the silence that perceives these movements remains. It is not something you create. It is something you recognize. Like recognizing a familiar face in a crowd, it has always been there. You just weren't paying attention. Remember that time when you were looking at the sea, mesmerized by the waves? Or in front of a bonfire, transfixed by the movement of the flames? Listening to a song that made you forget yourself for a few minutes? That silent enchantment was the observer showing itself, not as something separate from you, but as you without the layers, without the voice that narrates, without the critic that judges, without the ego that tries to prove itself. And that is why it is universal. The observer who sees your thoughts now is the same one who saw Buddha's thoughts under the Bodhi tree. It is the same one that sees the thoughts of a Tibetan monk in silence in the mountains. It is the same one that sees the thoughts of a child playing alone, completely immersed in the moment. It is the same one that sees the thoughts of someone lost in reverie on a subway in Tokyo. Each person's experience is unique. The content is different, but the space that observes is always the same. This silent awareness is like a mirror. It reflects everything but is not contaminated by anything. You can place any object in front of it, beautiful or ugly, valuable or disposable, and the mirror reflects with the same clarity. It does not cling to what is beautiful. It does not reject what is ugly. It just reflects. And when the object is removed, the mirror remains empty, ready to reflect the next one. And the closer you get to this silence, the more you realize that what you believed yourself to be, your name, your history, your desires, your fears, are only passing forms. Waves moving over a background that never changes your presence. You are not the wave. You are the ocean. And the ocean remains even when the waves break. The mind screams. The observer listens. The mind analyzes. The observer just sees. The mind wants to solve. The observer simply is. And most importantly, you don't have to try to be that observer. You already are. All you need to do is realize when you get lost in the inner commentator and gently return to the silence that has always been there. And perhaps in the process, you will realize something profound. What you have always sought, peace, freedom, meaning, was never out there. It was in the interval between one thought and another, in the silence between two words, in the invisible space between you and the world. The question is no longer how to find the observer, but why do I insist on forgetting it? But recognizing the observer once is not enough. We need to understand why we keep forgetting. The reason we keep forgetting the observer is simple. He has no history. He has no name. He has no age. And we have been trained our whole lives to believe that we are our history, our name, our age. We are our successes and failures. We are our memories and our future plans. We are the sum of everything we have accumulated. And the observer? The observer has accumulated nothing. He carries no baggage. He takes no pride in achievements. He feels no shame for mistakes. He is simply present. And for a mind conditioned to define itself by what it possesses, experiences, knowledge, identities, this is disconcerting. How can you be something that has no form? How can you be something that does not change? How can you be something that cannot be defined? And that is precisely why all the great spiritual traditions, from east to west, point to the same experience. Not because they agree on doctrines or rituals, but because they recognize the same silent space that is in all of us. The Upanishads, ancient texts from India, describe this poetically. The inner self is immovable, yet it moves everything. It is distant, yet also very close. It is within everything and at the same time outside of everything. It seems contradictory, doesn't it? But this is exactly how the observer manifests itself. It is so close that you cannot see it directly. It is like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. You are looking through them, but you cannot see them. The observer is that through which you see everything, but which never becomes the object of vision. In Tibetan Buddhism, there is the concept of Rigpa, the naked presence, the consciousness that exists before any thought, before any identity. It is not something you achieve through effort. It is something you have always been, but which you have covered with layers of conditioning, like a golden statue covered in mud. The mud may be there for years, decades, perhaps a lifetime, but the gold has always been intact underneath. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor of Rome, practiced something similar among the Stoics. He wrote in his personal journals, "Observe your thoughts as if you were observing someone else's thoughts, with distance, with clarity, without judgment." He was not trying to eliminate thoughts. He was just recognizing that they weren't him. And in that recognition, he found a freedom that no empire could offer. The most fascinating thing is to realize that this awareness is not something mystical or inaccessible. It reveals itself in the simplest moments. Remember that time when you were standing by the sea, completely mesmerized by the waves breaking on the sand? You weren't thinking about anything specific. You weren't planning. You weren't analyzing. You were just present. And in that moment, something in you quieted down. Or when you were standing in front of a bonfire, completely absorbed by the movement of the flames. The fire danced, changed shape, created random patterns, and you just watched, without trying to understand, without trying to explain, just seeing. That state of silent enchantment was the observer showing itself, not as something separate from you, but as you without the layers of the ego, without the need to narrate, without the compulsion to control, or that song that made you forget yourself for a few minutes. You weren't listening as a music critic. You weren't comparing it to other songs. You were just immersed in the experience. And when the song ended, you slowly came back, like someone waking up from a deep dream. These moments are not rare. They happen all the time. But we rarely pay attention to them because we are too busy narrating the experience as it happens. This silent awareness is like a mirror. It reflects everything, thoughts, emotions, sensations, but is not contaminated by anything. You may feel intense anger, and the observer sees the anger without becoming angry. You may feel deep sadness, and the observer sees the sadness without becoming sad. Not because he is cold or indifferent, but because he understands that emotions are temporary states, not permanent identities. And the closer you get to this silence, the more you realize something revolutionary. What you believed yourself to be, your name, your history, your desires, your fears, are only passing forms. Waves moving over a background that never changes. You are not the wave, you are the ocean. And the ocean remains intact even when the waves break. The observer who sees your thoughts now is the same one who saw Buddha's thoughts under the Bodhi tree 2,500 years ago. It is the same one who sees the thoughts of a Tibetan monk in silence in the Himalayan mountains. It is the same one who sees the thoughts of a child playing alone in the backyard, completely immersed in his imaginary world. It is the same one who sees the thoughts of someone lost in reverie on a crowded subway in Tokyo. Each person's experience is unique. The content is different. The stories are different. But the space that observes is always the same. It is the same consciousness, the same presence, the same silence. And when you recognize this, something profound dissolves. The feeling of being separate from others begins to disappear, because you realize that the same consciousness that looks through your eyes is looking through everyone's eyes. It's not a theory. It's not a beautiful belief. It's a direct perception. And it changes everything, because when you see that the observer is not personal, you stop protecting it. You stop trying to prove that you are special, important, different. You simply are. And in that simple being, there is a freedom that no external achievement can offer. But there is something even more disconcerting about this perception. And perhaps it is the most difficult part to accept. This observer does not age. We have all had this mysterious feeling, but we rarely pay attention to it. The feeling that even though everything inside us changes over the years, our body, ideas, tastes, certainties, something remains exactly the same. The look behind your eyes, the silent presence that has accompanied you from childhood to today. What is it in us that never ages? When you were 5 years old and looked at the world, you felt the same sense of existence that you feel now. Not the same thoughts, not the same concerns, but the feeling of being present, of being aware, of simply being. That feeling is identical. Decades may have passed. Your body has changed completely. Your cells have been replaced several times. Your beliefs have transformed. Your priorities have reversed. But that presence, that awareness that observes everything remains intact. This is the strangest and most revealing part. The observer has no age. He does not belong to time. He watches time pass but is not affected by it. It is like the space inside a room. You can fill the room with furniture, you can empty it completely, you can tear down the walls and build it again. But the space remains the same. It does not increase. It does not decrease. It does not age. Krishnamurti said, "The observer is the observed." And that means that the moment you realize that there is no separation between the seer and the seen, duality dissolves. There is no longer subject and object. There is no longer I and world. There is only consciousness recognizing itself in multiple forms. And that consciousness has no beginning and no end. It has no past and no future. There is only now, always now. Alan Watts compared this to jazz improvisation. There is no conductor. There is no central control. Only lively, coherent fluidity, but without a fixed direction. The music happens. The musicians play, but there is no one behind orchestrating each note. The observer is the silence behind the music, the space where the music happens. And without that space, there would be no music. The Upanishad said, "The inner self is immobile, but it moves everything. It is distant, but also very close. It is within everything, and at the same time outside of everything." This paradox is only resolved when you stop trying to understand it intellectually and simply recognize the experience. You cannot think your way to the observer. You can only perceive it. And why does this matter? Because when you perceive this timeless aspect in yourself, your relationship with life changes completely. Grief loses some of its weight. Because you understand that what died was only a form, not the essence. Attachment dissolves. Because you realize that trying to hold on to what is temporary is fighting against the very nature of existence. The fear of death transforms. It doesn't disappear, but it loses its ability to paralyze you. Because you recognize that what you truly are was never born and therefore can never die. You begin to understand that everything that dies in you, the stories you told about yourself, the roles you played, the masks you wore, was never your true self. It was just content, not the vessel. It was just the wave, not the ocean. Much of our pain comes from trying to hold on to what is impermanent. We cling to memories as if they were solid. We cling to people as if they would never change. We cling to ideas about ourselves as if they were eternal truths. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. Everything slips away, and suffering is born from the struggle against the inevitable. The observer, on the other hand, does not try to hold on to anything. He sees, he lets go, and he remains. That is true freedom. It is not the freedom to do whatever you want. It is the freedom not to be carried away by what you are not to be confused with the temporary content that passes through consciousness. As Eckhart Tolle taught, you are not the voice in your head, you are the one who hears it. And when this is understood, not as a concept but as a living experience, something in you relaxes deeply, because you stop struggling to be someone. You stop trying to prove your worth. You stop trying to build a solid identity that will stand the test of time. You simply are. And here's something even more radical. The observer is not yours. It is not a spiritual achievement. It is not the private property of your individual consciousness. It is the same in everyone. What changes is the content that appears. Different thoughts, different emotions, different experiences. But the space that perceives all of this is one. When you recognize this, something in you opens up. Barriers fall away. The separation between you and others begins to seem like a constructed illusion, because the same silence that observes you is what observes the other. The same unchanging background that is behind your eyes is behind everyone's eyes. Mystics of all traditions have called this universal consciousness. But it is not a matter of faith, it is a matter of seeing. If you want to deepen this understanding even further, if you want to explore how this perception transforms not only intellectual understanding, but the daily experience of living, subscribe to the channel. There is a greater journey happening here, and perhaps you are just beginning to realize how much there is still to discover. But stay with me now, because recognizing the timeless observer is only the beginning. The question that remains is, if this is true, why do we continue to suffer? The answer is simple but difficult to accept. We continue to suffer because we continue to try to hold on to what cannot be held, because we insist on turning the temporary into permanent, because we cling to waves and forget that we are the ocean. Think about how many times you have suffered because of something that changed, a relationship that ended, a job you lost, a version of yourself that no longer exists. And in all these cases, the suffering did not come from the change itself. It came from resistance to change, from the attempt to freeze what is in constant motion. We cling to memories as if they were solid, but memories are only interpretations of the past filtered by the present. We cling to people as if they will never change, but everyone changes. You change, they change. And yet we insist on wanting them to remain exactly as they were when we first met them. We cling to ideas about ourselves. I am this way. I have always been this way, as if they were eternal truths. But you have been many different versions of yourself, and you will be many more. The problem is not impermanence. The problem is the illusion of permanence. And this is where the observer offers a way out. Not a way out through control or denial, but a way out through recognition. The observer sees everything pass by, sees thoughts arise and disappear, sees emotions come and go, sees stories form and dissolve, and at no point does he try to hold on. He is not cold, he is not indifferent, he feels everything. but he does not confuse himself with what he feels. It's like standing by the river, watching the leaves float by in the current. Some leaves are beautiful, others are torn, dirty, and you just watch. You don't try to hold on to the beautiful ones. You don't try to push away the ugly ones. You just see. Eckhart Tolle says you are not the voice in your head. You are the one who hears it. And that extends to everything. You are not the emotion you feel. You are the one who perceives the emotion. You are not the thought that arises. You are the one who witnesses the thought. You are not the story you tell about yourself. You are the space where the story happens. And when this is understood, not intellectually but experientially, the nature of suffering changes. It doesn't disappear, but it loses its ability to dominate you. Because you understand that suffering, like everything else, is temporary. It's a wave, and you are not the wave. You are the ocean that sustains all waves. This doesn't mean you stop feeling. Quite the contrary. You feel everything more intensely, more truly, because you are no longer fighting what you feel. You are no longer trying to turn sadness into joy, anger into peace, fear into courage. You simply allow everything to be what it is. And in that allowing, there is a profound freedom. The observer is not an escape strategy. It is not a way to avoid pain. It is a way to be completely present with the pain without getting lost in it. To feel sadness without becoming sadness. To see fear without letting it paralyze you. And here's the paradox. When you stop fighting suffering, when you stop trying to eliminate it, when you simply observe it with the same clarity with which you would observe a cloud passing in the sky, it transforms. Not because you did something, but because you stopped doing. You stopped resisting. You stopped identifying with it. True freedom is not the freedom to never suffer again. It is the freedom not to let yourself be defined by suffering, not to confuse yourself with it, to recognize that no matter how intense the pain, it is happening within a larger space. And that space, the observer, remains untouched. Buddhists call this equanimity. The Stoics called it ataraxia. The Upanishads called it ananda, the bliss that exists independently of external circumstances. Different names, but the experience is the same. The realization that there is something in you that cannot be hurt, cannot be destroyed, cannot be diminished. And when you recognize this, the separation between you and others begins to dissolve in an even deeper way. Because you realize that everyone is suffering in the same way. Everyone is trying to hold on to what cannot be held. Everyone is fighting against impermanence. Everyone is confusing the wave with the ocean. And then a natural compassion arises. Not a forced or moral compassion, but a compassion that arises from recognition. You see the other person suffering and understand. This is the same suffering I have felt. It is the same struggle I have fought. And in that recognition, the barriers fall, because you are no longer judging. You are no longer separating me and them. You are just seeing. As Rumi wrote centuries ago, beyond ideas of right and wrong, there is a field. I will meet you there. That field is the observer. It is the space where duality dissolves, where there is no more judgment, where there is only presence, witnessing everything with the same clarity. And perhaps that is the greatest transformation that the recognition of the observer offers. Not the elimination of suffering, but the dissolution of the illusion that you are alone in your suffering. The realization that the same silent space that exists in you exists in everyone. And that deep down there is no separation. But how does this translate into real life? How can you live from this recognition without getting lost again in the illusions of the mind? Living from the observer is not adopting a new philosophy. It is not memorizing beautiful concepts to repeat in conversations. It is a change of internal position so subtle that at first you don't even notice it has happened. But it transforms everything. Because what changes is not the content of your life. The same problems still appear, the same emotions still arise, the same thoughts still circulate. What changes is where you live. Before you were the actor completely lost in the role. You believed you were the character. You suffered when the character suffered. You got excited when the character won. Your entire identity was tied to the script, but now you begin to realize that you are also the stage, and the stage supports the entire play but is not confused with it. Tragedy can happen, comedy can happen, and the stage remains. This change does not require you to abandon your life. It does not require you to isolate yourself, meditate for hours, or renounce everything. It only requires you to recognize the space that has always been there. And this recognition begins with something very simple. Stop trying to change the content of your thoughts and start observing the space that sustains them. Imagine you are sitting by a river. It is autumn. Leaves fall from the trees and are carried away by the current. Some leaves are beautiful, red, golden, intact. Others are torn, brown, rotting. And you just watch. You don't try to hold on to the beautiful ones. You don't try to push away the ugly ones. You are there, present, watching everything pass by. That is the practice. It is not passivity. It is not indifference. It is conscious presence. It is the ability to witness everything, critical thoughts, intense emotions, painful memories, without being swept away by the current, without identifying with what passes. You see anger arise. You see sadness arrive. You see fear emerge. And instead of fighting them or trying to expel them, you simply acknowledge, this too shall pass. Because it will. Everything passes. The most intense emotions last at most a few minutes. The most obsessive thoughts lose strength when they no longer receive attention. The stories we tell about ourselves dissolve when we stop feeding them. And the observer remains. He was there before the anger. He will be there after it. He is not touched by what he witnesses. But here's the crucial point. This does not mean that you become cold. It does not mean that you stop feeling. Quite the contrary. You begin to feel more truly, more completely, because you are no longer dividing your attention between feeling and judging what you feel. You are no longer thinking, I shouldn't be feeling this, what's wrong with me? You just feel. And in that pure feeling, without narrative, there is an intensity and beauty that the mind has never been able to access. And something else happens. As you live more and more from this place, a natural compassion begins to emerge. Not a forced compassion, not a moral imperative to be a good person, but a visceral understanding that everyone is caught up in their own stories, reacting to their own inner voices, struggling with their own fears. And you recognize this because you've been there. You still are sometimes. The difference is that now you know it's not just that. You see someone acting out of anger, and instead of judging or retaliating, you recognize this person is lost in character. They are completely identified with the emotion. And there is tenderness in that recognition. Not superiority, not pity, but a deep understanding that human suffering is almost always born of this fundamental confusion between who we are and what we feel. Rumi wrote, "Beyond ideas of right and wrong, there is a field. I will meet you there." That field is the observer. It is the space where there is no more judgment, where there is no more division between me and you. There is only presence. There is only consciousness witnessing consciousness. And that presence changes everything. It changes how you listen. Instead of just waiting for your turn to speak, you really listen. It changes how you respond. Instead of automatically reacting to provocations, you choose. It changes how you see the world. The light coming through a glass window, the smell of coffee in the morning, the unexpected laughter of a child. Little things that once went unnoticed now take on an almost luminous clarity. Living as an observer is rediscovering simplicity. It is being whole, even in the midst of chaos. It is realizing that the peace you have always sought is not in eliminating problems, but in recognizing the space that exists independently of them. Problems come and go. Crises arise and are resolved. But you, the real you, the observer, remain. And perhaps the most beautiful thing is this. You don't have to become someone else. You don't have to reach a special state. You don't have to become enlightened or transcendent. You just need to recognize what you already are, what you have always been. The silent space that witnesses everything, but is never lost in what it witnesses. As the Zen masters teach, sit, observe, do nothing. The world reveals itself. And then you remember, you are not the passing clouds. You are the sky. You are not the content that appears and disappears. You are the space where everything happens. And in that recognition, there is a freedom that no external achievement could ever offer. But there is still one last layer, one last revelation. And perhaps it is the most important of all. There is an ancient teaching among Zen masters that says, before awakening, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. During awakening, mountains cease to be mountains and rivers cease to be rivers. After awakening, mountains return to being mountains and rivers return to being rivers. At first, this seems confusing, almost meaningless, but when you experience it, you understand perfectly. Before recognizing the observer, you lived completely identified with the story. You were your thoughts, you were your emotions, you were your memories and your future plans. The world seemed solid, definitive, and you moved through it as if everything were exactly what it appeared to be. Then comes the awakening, and suddenly nothing is what it seemed. You realize that thoughts are not you, emotions are not you, the story you told about yourself is not you, and for a while everything feels strange. Things lose their solidity, certainties dissolve. You look at the world and see through the illusion. Mountains cease to be mountains because you realize that even the way you name things is just convention, just language superimposed on pure reality. But then there is a return, not a return to ignorance, not a return to blind identification, but a return to simplicity. Mountains are mountains again, rivers are rivers again. The world looks the same, but you never see it the same way again. because now you know that everything that arises in the space of consciousness. And that space, the observer, is what you really are. You don't have to renounce the world. You don't have to abandon your responsibilities. You don't have to stop feeling or caring. You just have to remember whenever you forget that you are not the content. You are the space. You are not the wave. You are the ocean. And the ocean may have violent storms on the surface, but deep down there is always an immense, untouched stillness. And the most beautiful thing is that this perception does not require you to become someone else. You continue to be yourself, with your preferences, your peculiarities, your flaws. But now there is a greater space around all of that. A space that allows, that welcomes, that doesn't try to force anything to be different from what it is. You will still forget. You will still get lost in the story. You will still identify with thoughts and emotions. That's part of being human. But the difference is that now you know the way back. You know that the observer is always there, waiting, not judging, not demanding, just present, always present. And every time you come back, it gets a little easier, not because you are becoming better, but because you are remembering what you have always been. Like a person who has lived their entire life in a dark room and suddenly someone turns on the light. At first, the brightness is uncomfortable, then your eyes adjust, and then you realize that the light was always there. You just didn't know where the switch was. The observer is that switch. And it's not hidden somewhere far away, accessible only to the enlightened or the wise. It's here, now, in the space between this thought and the next, in the silence that exists before you name what you feel, in the presence that witnesses these words being read. You don't have to search, you don't have to reach, you don't have to become, you just have to recognize. And in that recognition, something inside you relaxes deeply, because you realize that the search is over, not because you found something new, but because you realize that you were never lost. You were always exactly where you needed to be. You were always exactly what you needed to be. And now you can live, not as someone trying to prove something, not as someone running away from something, but as someone who is simply present, whole, alive, conscious. The world keeps turning, problems keep arising, emotions keep flowing, but you and the real you remain, like the sky that receives all the storms without ever being destroyed by them. Nothing has changed out there, but now you understand why you always felt that something didn't fit. Because you were trying to fit into a story that was never true. You were trying to be the character when you were always the stage. You were trying to be the wave when you were always the ocean. And maybe deep down you always knew that. Maybe that's why you've watched this far. Because something in you recognized the truth in these words. Not as an external truth, but as something that has always been inside you, just waiting to be seen. If you've made it this far, there's something that needs to be said. This journey doesn't end here. It never ends. Because every moment offers a new opportunity to recognize the observer. Every breath is an invitation to return to silence. Every thought is a chance to remember, I am not this. I am the one who sees this. Leave a comment. When did you realize you were confusing the voice with the observer? What was the moment when something clicked? Your experience may be exactly what someone else needs to read to finally understand. And if this journey has touched something in you, don't let the algorithm decide if we'll meet again. Subscribe to the channel. Because there is much more to explore, there is much more to recognize. Watch the next videos on the channel, count on me, and follow the white rabbit.